In the quiet neighborhood of Indianapolis, a horrific crime unfolded. A man, consumed by jealousy and rage, made a chilling decision that would change lives forever. Kayla Netherland, 25, was 5 months pregnant when her estranged husband, Jeremy McBride, stormed into her home and shot her 5 times. The unborn child did not survive. What drove this man to commit such an unspeakable act? This is the tragic case of Kayla Netherland.
Kayla Netherland and Jeremy McBride had once been a couple filled with hope. Married young, their relationship seemed solid, but behind closed doors, things had fallen apart. By September 2024, their marriage was beyond repair and they had separated. But for McBride, the love story wasn't over. He was still clinging to the past, refusing to let go. On January 19, 2025, Kayla was at her home, a modest house in Indianapolis, when her estranged husband arrived unannounced. A friend of Kayla's had also come by to do laundry. Not knowing she would become a witness to horror inside the house, McBride confronted Kayla in the bathroom. Tensions were high. Kayla was 5 months pregnant with a child McBride did not believe was his. A child that symbolized, in his mind, betrayal. Then, in an act of sheer brutality, McBride raised a gun and shot Kayla 5 times in the back. She collapsed onto the cold bathroom floor, bleeding out. At that moment, Kayla's friend walked in. She saw McBride standing over the dying woman, expressionless, silent. Their eyes met. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the front door. The friend immediately called for help. Kayla was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save both her and her unborn child. Despite their efforts, the baby did not survive. Meanwhile, McBride was on the move. As he drove through the city, he made a phone call. A chilling confession. He told someone what he had done. He was heading to the police station to turn himself in. Police, tracking his license plate, caught up with him before he could arrive. When officers pulled him over, McBride stepped out of the car. He left the vehicle in drive, causing it to roll into a pole. He seemed dazed. "I was going to turn myself in," he told police. Then, as if reality had finally sunk in, he asked, "Is she okay?" Inside McBride's car, officers found the gun he used to shoot Kayla and handwritten letters addressed to her. Letters filled with anger, frustration, and regret. They spoke of his hatred for her supposed infidelity, his broken dreams, and his belief that he was never good enough for her. He had wanted a future with her, but now, all that remained was blood and death. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to the shooting, a disturbing truth emerged. This was never meant to be just a murder. McBride had planned to kill Kayla, their unborn child, and then himself. Days before the shooting, he had purchased the gun and ammunition. The act was premeditated, driven by a twisted sense of control. On the day of the attack, McBride and Kayla had spent time together, visiting a Goodwill store, talking. But beneath his calm demeanor, his mind was already made up. Later that evening, as they spoke in her bedroom, McBride sat on the bed while Kayla stood in the bathroom. Then, as he would later tell detectives, it just made sense in that moment. Without hesitation, he fired. 5 bullets tore through Kayla's back, ending the life of a child she had desperately wanted. A child she had called her miracle baby. After enduring multiple failed pregnancies, doctors worked tirelessly to save Kayla's life. She survived, but at a cost. During emergency surgeries, she lost part of her colon, small intestine, her left ovary, and fallopian tube. The baby she had longed for gone in the hospital. Kayla's family struggled with grief. In a statement, they said, she was 5 months pregnant with her miracle baby, and she has lost her baby due to this outrageous crime committed against her. McBride, now facing charges of attempted murder and feticide, sat in jail without bond. His confession was hauntingly cold. "Maybe she will come back one day, but not for me," he wrote in one of his letters. "But in many ways, I killed her." For Kayla, survival was both a blessing and a curse. She had lost her child, endured unbearable pain, and had to live with the knowledge that the father of her child had tried to end her life. Yet, in her survival, there was a chance for justice.
Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, well, today we're looking at a tough one. The attempted murder of Kayla Netherland by her estranged husband, Jeremy McBride.
Right.
And we've been going through a lot of material for this one.
Oh, yeah.
News articles, legal documents, the whole 9 yards. And let me tell you, this is a chilling story.
I bet. I mean, it's always so striking, isn't it, how like a relationship just ending can turn so dark so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, we know domestic violence is sadly not uncommon, but this case,
Yeah.
the planning, the premeditation, that's a whole other level of disturbing.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's set the scene a little bit. January 2025, Indianapolis. Kayla is 5 months pregnant when McBride just shows up at her place.
Unannounced.
Yeah, totally unannounced. And, you know, their relationship was already on the rocks. McBride was even questioning if he was the father.
Oh, wow.
And to make things even weirder, a friend of Kayla's is there, just doing the laundry, totally unaware of what's about to go down.
Oh, man. That's just like an extra layer of awful, not only for her having to witness that,
Right.
but it also says something about McBride. Like, he wasn't even trying to hide anything.
Yeah, it's truly chilling. So McBride confronts Kayla. They're in the bathroom, and he just shoots her.
Just like that.
Yeah, 5 times
That's
in the back.
God, the bathroom, you know,
Yeah.
a place where you're supposed to feel safe, private,
Right.
and he turns it into that. It's like he's really driving home that power dynamic, that control.
And Kayla's friend, she walks in right after it happens, sees McBride just standing over Kayla, and nothing. No emotion on his face.
Wow.
And then he just walks away.
That's more disturbing than any kind of outburst, I think.
I know, right?
Like, it speaks to a real detachment from reality, a complete disconnect, almost like he's in shock or something.
Yeah. So he calls someone, confesses to the shooting, says he's turning himself in, but get this. Police intercept him before he gets to the station. He gets out of his car, leaves it running. The car ends up rolling into a pole, and he's just totally dazed.
Really?
Yeah, like he's in some kind of fog.
Huh. I wonder if that's like a delayed reaction to the trauma, like maybe a kind of shock setting in, you know?
Maybe. But then this is the crazy part. He asked the police, is she okay?
No way.
I swear. Like, he completely forgot that he shot her 5 times.
That's wild. That question right there shows you how disconnected he is from what actually happened.
It's truly bizarre. So they search his car, find the gun, and also these handwritten letters addressed to Kayla.
Letters? What, like love letters?
No, not exactly. They're filled with anger, regret, self-pity. He talks about how he wasn't good enough for her.
Oh, okay. So this wasn't some kind of heat of the moment thing.
No, not at all. This was planned. And it seems like it all came down to this desperate need for control.
Yeah, those letters, they give you a glimpse into his head, like all that emotion, anger, resentment definitely points to some deep-seated insecurity.
Yeah.
And we see this a lot with domestic violence, this need to take back control when they're faced with rejection.
Right. And later on, they found out that he'd actually bought the gun and ammo just days before the shooting.
Wow. That's chilling. I mean, that really reinforces the premeditation, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, were there any signs? Could anyone have seen this coming?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And what makes it even more bizarre is that they actually spent the day of the shooting together. They went to Goodwill, had conversations.
Lily.
Yeah, it's like he was living a double life, putting on a normal face while planning this horrific act.
It's scary how common that is, though, right? That duality.
I know. And then later, when he's talking to the detectives, he just casually says, it just made sense in that moment. Like, shooting Kayla was the only logical thing to do.
It's like his brain just snapped his statement.
It shows how distorted his thinking was. In his mind, violence was the answer. So tragically, Kayla's baby, who she considered a miracle after having multiple miscarriages.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the baby didn't make it. And Kayla, well, she's alive, but the damage is extensive.
I can't even imagine losing a child like that after everything she went through.
It's heartbreaking. And then there's Kayla. I mean, to survive that, but the physical and emotional scars.
It's not just about the physical injuries, is it? It's the trauma, the betrayal, the long road to healing.
She lost part of her colon, her small intestine, her left ovary, her fallopian tube. The list just goes on.
It's a miracle she survived. But still, that level of injury, it's a constant reminder of the violence. And then there's the unseen scars, the ones that run deep, that impact every part of your life.
Right. And it's not just Kayla and McBride who are affected. Her family, the community, everyone is reeling from this.
Absolutely. This kind of violence, it ripples outwards. It impacts everyone. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about safety and security. It's a societal issue, one we all need to face head on.
So McBride, he's in jail, no bond, facing attempted murder and feticide charges. But there's this one line from his letters that's really stuck with me. He wrote, "Maybe she will come back one day, but not for me, but in many ways, I killed her."
Whoa.
It's like he understands the gravity of what he did, but in this twisted, possessive way.
That quote, it's so revealing, isn't it? It shows how distorted his view of the situation is. He sees himself as the victim, in a way. It's this twisted sense of love and control, a complete lack of accountability.
And Kayla, she's left to pick up the pieces. The road to recovery for survivors like her is incredibly long and difficult.
Absolutely. It's a journey that takes immense strength and courage. And it's a journey that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, therapy, support. It's about finding a way to heal, to reclaim your life.
This case, it's more than just a story, isn't it? It's a look into the darkest parts of human nature.
It's a reminder that these things happen, that this kind of violence is real. And it's a reminder that we need to do better, to understand the warning signs, to offer support, to create a world where these tragedies don't happen.
We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. The attack, the psychology behind it, the impact. There's a lot to unpack here.
For sure. It's a heavy topic, but it's one we need to talk about. Because only by talking about it, by understanding it, can we hope to prevent it from happening again.
And we'll continue this conversation in part 2 of our deep dive.
As we sort of dig deeper into McBride and his actions, it's important to look beyond just him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you.
Like, it's not just about his individual psychology, but also, I think, those bigger forces at play, those societal norms that shape how we view relationships and gender roles and all that.
You're talking about toxic masculinity, right? The whole idea that men have to be strong and dominant, in control.
Exactly. And when those expectations aren't met, when a man feels like he's losing that control.
Yeah.
Well, we see what can happen.
Like with McBride, the relationship ends, he's not sure he's the father, and it's like his whole sense of manhood is threatened.
Right, and then it all explodes into violence. And remember those letters he wrote to Kayla? Those offer some real insights there.
Yeah, they were intense.
It wasn't just sadness or heartbreak, It was this deep anger, this blame directed at her. Almost like he felt entitled to her love, to her life even.
That's scary. What was it about the letters specifically that stood out to you?
Well, the language he used. For one, it was very possessive, calling her mine, even though they were separated. And he kept talking about feeling inadequate, not being good enough for her. It's this mix of self-pity and resentment that can be really dangerous,
Like he couldn't handle the thought of her being happy without him.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to how we as a society often teach men to view relationships. This idea that their worth is tied to winning a woman, possessing her, and that losing her diminishes them somehow.
That's a tough cycle to break. How do we even start to challenge those expectations, those ingrained ideas about masculinity?
It's not easy. But I think education is key, right? We need to start talking about healthy relationships, consent, respect, and not just in adulthood, but early on in homes, schools, everywhere.
Right. We need to change the narrative from the ground up. But what about intervention? Like if we see those red flags, those warning signs, what can we do?
That's the tough part. Because often the abuse happens behind closed doors, like we saw with McBride and Kayla. But we can still be vigilant. We can learn to recognize those signs. The controlling behavior, the isolation tactics, the emotional abuse. And if we see something, we have to say something. We need to reach out, offer support, encourage those who are experiencing abuse to get help.
You mentioned help. What kind of resources are out there for victims of domestic violence?
Well, there are shelters, of course, and hotlines, counseling services. Lots of organizations are doing amazing work in this area. And it's important to remember that reaching out for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Totally. Nobody should have to suffer in silence. So going back to Kayla, let's talk about the long-term impact of this trauma. You said that the emotional and psychological wounds can be as bad as the physical ones. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. Imagine being shot by someone you loved, losing your baby, and having all these life-altering injuries. It's going to take a huge toll on you mentally and emotionally. Survivors often deal with PTSD, anxiety, depression. They have trouble trusting people.
Like their whole world has been turned upside down.
Exactly. And that can affect everything. Their relationships, their work, their overall well-being. Healing from something like this is a long, difficult process. They need therapy, support groups, a strong network of people who understand what they're going through.
It's amazing, though, isn't it? Kayla's resilience. Despite everything she's been through, she's still here, still fighting.
Oh, absolutely. Kayla's story is a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit. It shows that even in the face of such darkness, there's still hope. There's still a path to recovery. It's inspiring, really.
It really is. We're talking about the darkness, the violence, the psychology behind it all. But we can't forget about those stories of survival and resilience. They're important, too.
I agree. Those stories give us hope. You know, they remind us that things can get better, that healing is possible, and they inspire us to keep fighting for a world where this kind of violence doesn't happen in the first place.
So we've talked about McBride, his mindset, the societal pressures, and Kayla's long road to recovery. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to look at, the legal side of things.
Right, the charges against McBride.
Exactly. And specifically, the feticide charges. That's not something you see every day, and I think it's important to understand what that means, the implications of it all.
Yeah, definitely. The feticide charge, it adds another layer to this whole case. Yeah. Essentially, it means that the law recognizes the unborn child as a separate victim, because violence was done to a pregnant woman.
So it's acknowledging that a life was lost because of McBride's actions, even though Kayla survived.
Right. And this is a pretty big deal, legally speaking. It's a shift in how we think about fetal rights, about when life begins, all of that. It's a complex issue.
It feels like we're trying to find this balance, protecting the rights and autonomy of the woman while also recognizing the loss of the unborn child.
Exactly. It's a tough conversation, but it's one we need to have. And these feticide laws, they're designed for situations like this one, where the violence against the woman results in the death of the fetus.
So even though Kayla is alive, McBride is still facing serious consequences for the loss of her baby.
That's right. And those consequences, they can be pretty severe.
Yeah.
Lengthy prison sentences, sometimes even on par with homicide charges.
Wow. That really highlights the seriousness of this, how the law is evolving to recognize the gravity of these situations.
Yeah, it's a clear message that actions have consequences, and those consequences can extend far beyond the immediate victim.
But what about McBride's defense? Is there any legal ground for him to challenge these feticide charges?
Well, his lawyers will definitely try. They might argue that he didn't intend to harm the fetus, that he was solely focused on Kayla. Or they might try to pick apart the specific language of the feticide law in their state. These cases often come down to very fine legal distinctions.
So it sounds like this could set a precedent, Depending on how it all plays out, It could influence future feticide cases and how these laws are interpreted.
Definitely. This is a landmark case in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
Absolutely. But while we're watching that unfold, we can't forget about Kayla and what she's going through. We've talked about the trauma, but practically speaking, what does recovery look like for someone in her situation? So we're back, and we're picking up our discussion right where we left off. We've gone through a lot with this case, the attack itself, McBride's psychology, the impact on Kayla.
Right.
But there's one big piece we haven't fully explored yet, the legal side of things, specifically those feticide charges against McBride.
Right.
This is where things get really interesting, legally speaking.
They do. They do. It's like a whole other layer on top of everything else.
Yeah, because now it's not just about Kayla's injuries and trauma. It's acknowledging that a life was lost because of McBride's actions.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's a big step.
It is.
Like, for a long time, the focus was only on the pregnant woman.
Right.
But now we're seeing this shift, this recognition of the unborn child's, well, status, I guess.
And that opens up a whole can of worms.
It does.
Ethically, legally, where do you draw the line?
It's a tough one. Like, how do you balance the rights of the woman, her autonomy over her own body, with this idea that the unborn child is a separate entity that deserves protection?
It's a tricky balance, for sure.
It is. But I think that's what these feticide laws are trying to grapple with.
Right.
They're specifically for situations like this,
Yeah.
where there's violence against a pregnant woman and it results in the death of the fetus.
So even though Kayla survived, McBride is still facing these serious charges because his actions led to the loss of her baby. And those consequences,
Oh, they're significant.
they are.
I mean, we're talking long prison sentences, sometimes even comparable to homicide charges.
Wow.
Yeah, it shows you how seriously the justice system is taking this idea of a fetus as a victim.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. It's like saying, hey, this is not okay. You can't just do this and get away with it.
But what about McBride's defense? I mean, is there any legal argument they could make to challenge these charges?
Well, I'm sure his lawyers are looking into it.
Yeah.
They could try to argue that he didn't intend to harm the fetus, that his focus was on Kayla.
Right, right.
Or they might try to get into the specifics of the feticide law in their state. You know, these cases often come down to tiny details, interpretations of the law, precedents set by other cases. It can get really complicated.
Sounds like a legal minefield.
It can be. It can be.
Yeah.
And depending on how this plays out, it could have a ripple effect.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, it could set a precedent for future cases.
Right.
It could influence how these laws are interpreted, how they're applied moving forward. This is a big one.
It's a landmark case, really.
It is, in a lot of ways.
Okay, so we've talked about the law, the charges, but let's not forget about Kayla. I mean, she's the one who's really been through it. We've talked about the physical and emotional trauma, but what does recovery even look like for someone like her?
Well, it's a long road. It's a process,
Yeah.
There's no quick fix for this kind of thing. And it's not just about healing physically. It's about dealing with all the emotional baggage, too.
The psychological wounds.
Exactly.
Right.
So therapy's a big part of it.
Of course.
It gives you a safe space to work through everything, to learn coping mechanisms.
Right. So you can start to process what happened piece by piece.
Yeah. And it's not just therapy either. Support groups can be huge.
I can see that.
Connecting with other survivors, people who get it, who've been there, that can make a world of difference.
It's about finding that community, that shared understanding.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the role of loved ones.
Right. The people who are there for you day in and day out.
Yeah. They need to be supportive, patient. They need to listen without judging. Offer practical help. Just be there, basically.
Just be present.
Yeah, that's huge.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. It's been a heavy one, that's for sure.
It has.
We've gone into some dark places talking about the violence, the psychology, the trauma.
Right.
But I think it's important to have these conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
Because this is real.
It is.
This happens.
It happens every day.
And if anything good can come out of this case, it's that we're talking about it. We're raising awareness.
Exactly. We're shining a light on domestic violence, on the warning signs, on the resources that are out there for victims. And hopefully by doing that, we can prevent something like this from happening again.
That's the goal.
It is. And, while we've been focusing on the dark side of things, the violence, the trauma, we can't forget about Kayla's strength.
Right. Her resilience.
Yeah. Her story is a testament to the human spirit, the ability to overcome even the most horrific experiences.
It's a reminder that there's always hope.
Always.
Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive.
We have.
And as always, thank you for joining us for this difficult but important conversation.
Absolutely.
If you or someone you know needs help, remember that there are resources available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a great place to start. Their number is 1-800-799-SAFE. You're not alone.
You're not alone. And please reach out. There is help. There is hope.
Thanks for listening, everybody.